Okay, so good morning, everybody. Welcome for the third and last day of this international conference of the Arenas Project, Going Extreme, History, Narratives, and the Threat to Democracy in Europe. As well, most of you know, yesterday we talked about mostly nation and gender in different sessions with different keynote speaker and a round table. Today, this morning, we talk about science. For that, we have here as a keynote speaker, and I'm very glad that he accepts our invitation, Camil Ungureanu, that is Sarah Hunter Associate Professor of Political Philosophy at the Universitat Pompeu Fabra of Barcelona. He's also coordinator of the MA in Political Philosophy, and well, his research and really a lot of publication are focused on different topics, contemporary political theory, art, religion, cinema, and politics. I only want to remember some of these, well, his books and other publication, as in 2020, the book published here in Spain, Cine y Política, una inmersión rápida. 20, some years before, 2017, with Paolo Monti, Contemporary Democratic Theory and Religion, published by Routledge. With Ferrar Requejo, he edited also in 2016, Democracy, Law and Religious Pluralism in the New Europe. And before also with Kostika Bradatan, Religion in Contemporary European Cinema, the Post-Secular Constellation. And finally, he is now leading a project in the Pompeu Fabra University about far-right environment in Eastern and Southern Europe. He is working, in fact, about the case mostly of Spain and Romania, and he published this year an article with Alexandra Popartan about the new far-right, well, Vox in Spain, and ecology, the green grass of the nation is the title. Well, so Camil, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, and it's
Thanks
a pleasure to hear you.
So basically, I've been doing a few things except for science. So I tried to resist Stephen's invitation for a few months, but in the end, I gave in, so here I am trying to speak about science, and I'm glad to be here. I got to know also the members of the group. It's a fantastic atmosphere, so thanks a lot, Stephen, for the invitation and for the discussions. I mean, I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I'll try to connect to the discussions in the past 2 days, since I see this as a sort of open dialogue, right? So. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, the slide.
Thanks a lot. So I start with a quote from a book that actually is the background, in some sense, of my presentation. It's a book from 1944, an old book by Adorno and Horkheimer, The Dialectic of Enlightenment. And what they basically say in this quote is that the program, the Enlightenment, meant basically the project, a project of emancipation of society through knowledge and through science. But actually, as Francis Bacon, the philosopher, noted from the very beginning of modernity, knowledge, scientific knowledge, is power, is huge power. And with huge power, obviously, we have social and political problems. I'll try to unwrap a little bit this basic intuition. So in the presentation, I'll deal head-on with a question that was tantalizingly asked a couple of times yesterday by Stephen, and emerged also in the first day a little bit. What is actually extreme, right? I'll try by the end of the presentation to to venture a definition or a characterization. And my whole argument is about the necessity to actually enlarge the focus of this concept, extremism, right? So I have a part which is more of a diagnostic of the contemporary situation, and I'll go beyond the far right. I'll do a little bit of a relationship between far right and science, and the last part will be a little bit more constructive. So pedantically, I start, and I wanted to keep in mind this definition of the Oxford Dictionary of what is extreme. So where does it come from? Extremus it's a superlative form of exter, outside. Outer is referred to what is greatest, to the furthest point, what is the most intense, as in extreme weather, extreme emotions. So it has a physical and a metaphorical meaning. In the case of extreme far right, extreme is used as a sort of normally as a sort of a spatial metaphor, just like far right. Far from what? Far from the center, right? Opposed words in the Oxford Dictionary are normal, reasonable, acceptable, what refers to the center, okay? I'll try to problematize that, to scratch a little bit the surface. The argument is this: while I think that a lot of the discussion, not all discussions, a lot of discussion refers to or takes into account extreme narratives and also practices by focusing on far right, I think that's a symptom, right? So a lot of the debates focus on the symptom and not on the structural problems at stake. So I want to broaden the concept of the extreme by referring to, first, to other phenomena that actually they were mentioned yesterday, mostly to the center-right parties, and complicate a little bit this narrative of contamination, mainstreaming that is fairly dominant in conventional political sciences. And the second part of the argument is to say that actually there is something deeper going on. There is what I call a logic of the extreme that is nested in doxa, core institution, and practices, right? So by drawing on the tradition of critical theory, and on some, I think, familiar arguments for you, I'll try to complicate a little bit the Oxford definition, right? So I'll do that in 4 steps, I think, yes. So for relationship between far right and science, telegraphically, because we have a roundtable, then I'll put a little bit on meat on the argument that we need to look at the extreme narrative and practices beyond the extreme or far right parties. That's really imperative. You know, it's more relevant practically, as I'll argue, and the mechanisms of production of extreme discourses in the public spheres should be complexified beyond the so-called mainstreaming, normalization, or contamination theses that are dominant in the conventional political science. Then I move to the structural argument concerning what I call the logic of the extreme, and I'll try to end in a positive, constructive note, right? So the focus, well, first the far right parties and the relationship with the extreme. Now, what do the current extreme right parties or far right parties do? So I go back to a nice explanation that they find in Marxist German ideology about the ideology as functioning as a camera obscura, right? That produces on the retina, the image produced on the retina is an inverted image. So I think that systematically, through various rhetorical strategies that can be mapped from United States to, I don't know, to the Philippines in recent time, the extremist authoritarian forces, what they do is to create a sort of a inverted world. So I give you here some six examples, science is between them. So the scientific consensus of about the climate change is sold or is framed as religion. That is, not any kind of religion, not the good religion, as dogma or dogmatic, right? Or, for instance, brazen fake news and are sold as real truth. Brazenness and vulgarity as honesty. Take, for instance, I give here the example of Trump's Truth Social, right? So there is a revendication of truths here, right? But we know that systematically he uses fake news. So this is part of this type of mechanisms. Or take, for instance, the piece of news from this morning that I read in the Euro Chamber. Who is the new proposals of extreme right for the prize of freedom of conscience? Elon Musk, right? Another example of this kind of disturbing rhetoric of inversion. Or, for instance, authoritarian practices are sold as the real freedom or as the real democracy. Or in the case of Vox, it's something that I wrote about, what they speak about is real ecology, right? As opposed to the fake ecology, that is the progress ecology, which is based actually on scientific knowledge. So the example can be multiplied. Reference to feminism and other issues. I don't want to say that this is all that far-right parties do in rhetorical terms, but I think this is really important. It's transversal and it happens at the global level. That is the creation of a sort of camera obscura, right? Now, concerning religion, there is variety. So there is the systematic inversion, but there is also variety. So you need to complexify that. So telegraphically, I think that far right moved globally away from a denialist, anti-scientific discourse, not in all cases. So here I give an example of a flamboyant Romanian female leader, which in a photo, this photo became famous. It's taken in a European Parliament, in the new European Parliament. She's newly elected in the European Parliament, and with an icon, she shouted, "In God we trust, you criminals." She had the muzzle as well to signify the fact that her freedom of speech is actually impeded by the criminals in the European Parliament. She is also dressed in the Romanian Ie, which is traditional popular dress. I mean, the whole package. You have it here. So this is a quote from her. She changed actually, meanwhile, in the sense that now explicitly she's pro-science. It's a quote from the period of COVID, right? I'm not going to speak that much about this because it's really familiar, the relationship with science and all this, right? So another attitude is actually has become a little bit more common, and what I call the partial acceptance of the scientific discourse, an acceptance that is based on minimization. So it's not climate emergency; it's climate change. You accept that. So those who are into climate emergency, those are the religious, dogmatic ones. So not rejection of the scientific discourse, but minimization, right? Okay? And the third element is a transformation, which is really interesting, a sort of transformative reappropriation, which kind of integrates the scientific discourse into a holist, New Age-ish type of myth-laden discourse. So here you have, different specialists, experts, scientists, doctors, lawyers, and so on and so forth that have their shows on TV, that have connections with the far right. This is one of them, and the aesthetics is really says it all. This guy, you know, what is written there is it's in Romanian. The translation is educational scientific show. And below, it's written, we promise immortality, right? And that's eccentric, but there's something deep, I think, going on, because what they appeal to is, well, they appeal to, on the one hand, to integrate science, don't deny science, but on the other hand, they want to come up with a sort of narrative that gives answers to what is a real problem: alienation in capitalist society. That's a structural problem, right? So the answer to a deep problem with problematic means, obviously, but they do that. And also, I think you need to take in seriously that because it's serious. I mean, if you think of Silicon Valley, and of programs like the Calico programs, which is dedicated to overcoming death, you know, it's a secretive program that involves scientists. Billions are involved. We don't know exactly what they do, and the idea is to overcome death. You know, the old religious, if you will, myth. So there is something going on there that is actually analyzed interestingly in this deconstructive book of Adorno and Horkheimer, in which they argue basically that although science in the modern period, as part of this program of the Enlightenment, was linked to the idea of disenchantment of the world, getting rid of religious illusions, right? Getting rid of falsity. Actually, what happened is that science has been generating new myths, right? And I think this is going on, and this is important to take into account, and is connected not simply conventionally with some far-right movements. It's not transversal. It's a sort of minority thing, but is deeply related to Silicon Valley, which has much more impact and much more influence, for instance. Now, I think also it's important to look beyond narrative. Take, for instance, Vox systematically. Take, for instance, Vox. In 2019, they made an eco-turn, just like other far-right forces. They changed the discourse. They embraced science in one way or another, right? But if you look at the practice, they're denialist. So in the sense that in practice, if you take concretely the beautiful environmental justice atlas, you find it on the web, that maps all the environmental conflicts in the world, right? So, and you can go to the country and see a list of environmental conflicts. It's really a nice tool. And you take all the conflicts in Spain in the past 6 years, conflicts between business interest and environmental protection. Vox sided all the time in practical terms with, well, guess what? With Pepe protecting the business interest and not the environment. So it's really important to, beyond the abandonment of the science denialism, to look at the practice to see exactly what is going on. Whether in practice, you know, they actually follow the scientific insights or do not. Okay. I want to this is something that emerged in the discussions. I mean, not everything that far right people say is extreme, I think. So, also there are some things that are actually reasonable and spot on, right? So they are, they're wrapped up in a nationalist, extremist, xenophobic discourse, but sometimes. And that's bizarre. Sometimes in practice, good causes in narrative, but also practical terms, concrete terms, are supported by bad arguments, by nationalist arguments, by religious xenophobia, right? So to give an example, in Romania, actually, the far right called our, the leader, George Simion, is a hardcore nationalist, but also an environmental activist. And that, he was an environmental activist, quite a few years before the foundation of the party, and they carry on with that, right? So, here I think there are some elements in some of the far right groups that we should look. You should look with the sort of complex glasses, as it were. For instance, there is a rejection in some far right voices of managerial scientism and an emphasis on the importance of the local or communal knowledges, right? And they are right on that, But again, they are right or not, in the sense that these good causes and good narrative elements, they're wrapped up in authoritarian practices and exclusivist forms of nationalism and so on, right? So now the second step of the argument, broadening the focus. And I broadened the focus with respect to center-right parties, but I think that some of the left-right parties as well fall into this category. So historians, you are the majority historian, I think should maybe complexify their agenda when it comes to the production and the practice of, extremist dynamics, let's say, okay? So this category of parties is really important because first it's the largest in the world, right? And it has a much more impact than the far-right parties, actually, right? So I think we need to actually blur the distinction between the two, again, contextually. And already, this was done yesterday, and I think convincingly. Both Alejandro and exactly, they pointed out with concrete examples the discussion of Rajoy and Sarkozy that actually extremist discourses and practices emerge at the center. I mean, Rajoy, this a little bit of context. The example that was given by Alejandro yesterday, I think he's not here, is from 2012 with this new health reform, right? In 2012, Vox did not exist. It was created in December 2013. And actually, it was irrelevant, absolutely irrelevant, with no impact on Spanish politics in 2019, right? So it erupted on the political scene, and since 2019 he has been having influence, but 2012 there is absolutely no influence. So the rottenness emerges in the center, There is no contamination here, okay? There is no mainstreaming from a force that comes from somehow outside of the liberal democratic framework, okay? There's something deeper going on, and we should focus on that. And the Sarkozy example is the same. I mean, at that point, Le Front National didn't play a key role in French politics. Now, yes, but at that point, no. Okay, it was really Sarkozy. It was really at the center. Okay, some historian is really shaking their head. So I'm already on shaky grounds. Of course, I'm with historians. I'm a philosopher. So, anyways, I want to move to a little bit of a safer ground, which is closer to what I know a little bit better. So, but I think because I think this argument holds in different cases, right? So. This argument complexifies this mainstream literature, which I don't think is wrong. I think it is right. I mean, this contamination, mainstreaming, normalization thesis, they're not the same thing. I don't have time to get into detail of a huge literature that mainly comes from the immigration studies initially, but I think we need to envisage different mechanisms of going extreme, as it were, to use the title of the conference. So, inner transformation. Think of India. I mean, Modi's party transformed, as it were, from the inside. Of course, we need to discuss what is this inside, because it's complex, But or the Republican Party, I guess. There is no extremist party that actually contaminated it. Or another mechanism is reverse contamination. As you get a little bit in detail, is the case in which the contamination exists, but it doesn't come from the far right. It actually comes from the center, and it moves to the far right. And that's in part the Spanish case, as I'll explain. On the other cases, you have just collusion and mutual enforcement. You see that in Spain right now, in certain cases in which Pepe is not really constrained to defend business interests in environmental conflicts. He's not constrained by alliances with Vox, but he just does it, right? So you have a sort of mutual enhancement, right? There is no external contamination or mainstreaming of something that happens in the outside, the outskirts, as it were, of the nice liberal democratic arena. So you need to complexify the mechanisms, right? There is contamination, there is normalization, but we need to actually map more complex mechanisms. So more concretely, here you have the great Aznar, who is the founder of the Partido Popular, which before is called Alianza Popular, anyway, People's Party. What you see is very clearly that the narrative that we call extremist in terms of ecology emerges with him, and emerges years before even the foundation of the Vox Party. And he has a strong anti-scientific dimension, which for us now is very familiar, because he proclaims, in different places, ecology is the new communism, right? This is more than 20 years ago, right? And posits that actually ecologism does what? Impedes on, and there are two rhetorical tropes for it that are interconnected. Ecologism, the ecology agenda, one, is totalitarian. That's the connection with communism. Communism, for him, doesn't mean Gramsci, it means Stalin, basically, right? So one is against freedom, right? But the uncanny thing is here that in some of the codes and in some of the positionings where he is pressed with the reference to scientific consensus, he appeals to freedom. Well, a freedom of speech. As if he's somebody who tell me, well, you should accept that water boils at 100 Celsius degrees. I say, hey, don't take a totalitarian position. I have freedom of speech here. Don't impede my freedom. So it's just absurd. But I mean, there are the tropes and the narrative structure that would be developed by Vox, right? Here you have it. And here there is another center-right fellow, is Václav Klaus, who was president after the 90s. He's really one of the key figures of Czech politics. He was both president and prime minister, right? And here he published a book called Not Green, wink, wink, not Green Planet, but Blue Planet, right? And he was presented, translated to Spain, promoted by Aznar. So here you have Aznar and Václav Klaus, I think in 2006, trashing the scientific consensus. So again, we should broaden the scope of our research. This is going on, right, and is expanding, right? So the center is under transformation. Pretty much, well, almost everywhere, right? In different degrees. The maverick trickster of the Spanish politics, the second most influential, if not maybe the most influential person in the People's Party. Here you have Ayuso. She has a variety on record, a variety of declarations whereby she actually minimizes, trashes science, makes fun of, right? Of the scientific discourse. I put here a rather large quote from El Simpático Rajoy, who invokes his cousin in the meeting of the best scientists in the world. To say, well, if you're not even able to predict the weather tomorrow, how can you actually develop a scientific discourse about climate change? I mean, come on, it's ridiculous. He says, appealing to his cousin. I mean, Rajoy, he was one of the kind, and we miss him, right? But here there are these two dimensions that are interconnected of this discourse, right? The opposition between the connection between the scientific consensus concerning climate change and religion or dogma, right? And the fact that this religion and dogma is imposed by the progressives and is a threat to freedom, right? Okay, so this is really Vox until recent times, and many, as you know, far right parties. Here, I couldn't refrain from putting an example. The aesthetics again says it all, but is a center right. She is the leader of a key center right party in Romania. We have elections in November in Romania, so we'll see Elena Lasconi, who is also flirts with denialism, right? Center right. So again, complexification. And this complexification, I think it should go deeper, right? And it should go deeper. I'm a little bit afraid to speak about that, but I think there is, because I'm not a historian, but luckily Alejandro left, so, but open my readings, not original research, but you see that there is a deep continuity here between Vox and Pompeu on the one hand, and the phases that is called desarrollismo, of the Franco regime. So basically, during Franco, you have this this image of Spanish nature, the celebration of Spanish nature, related to some organicism, nostalgia for home, for family, for protection. I mean, there is a continuity there. But Franco, in the later period, if you look at what he was doing, and that's the key argument of a fundamental book that deals with the question of water, right? That is fundamental for history of Spain, and it remains, it's dramatically so. It's becoming now liquid water by Zwingado. He basically argues, look, the discourse was that, but in practice, it was business, as much business as possible, right? At the international level. I mean, so really, this is this discourse. Actually, you have it in Vox, for instance. You have a certain vision of nature. I don't have time to get into that resonates with Francoism, a certain top way that are echoes even from the Nazi discourses about nature. Nostalgia, a crave for some sort of purity and protective purity, and so on and so forth. So, but when it comes to practical conflicts, is business as usual, right? Anyways, I want to move now to the third, a little bit more structural argument before getting maybe more constructive, not necessarily more optimistic, but no, always optimistic. So, okay, so I think we should go deeper, right? And I think that there is a sort of a logic, what I call a logic of the extreme, right? And if you think of the question of science, there is a sort of a double paradox that I kind of see in our capitalist societies, right? Can be democracies or authoritarian, can take authoritarian forms or kind of mixed forms. But I see this as a transversal thing, just as capitalism is transversal and global, right? So on the one hand, you have a ever-increasing reliance and dependence on scientific development, right? Think of artificial intelligence right now. It has an impact on all aspects of our lives, from politics to love, right? So to friendship, you name it, okay? On the other hand, there is an increasing what I call unavailability or opaqueness. And this is due, or opacity, and this is due to the fact that science is extremely complex, right? Who understands, I mean, you might get, as a professor of philosophy, if you put a little bit of effort, I might be able to understand what is going on in my, let's say fridge or something, right? But the large language models, how actually functions the artificial intelligence, I can understand some basic things, which are superficial, but how actually technically it works, that's hugely difficult. You really need to get into superior mathematics. You need to study seriously, right? And I think this gap, it increases between the impact of science, which it becomes ever more radical. Think of genetic engineering, right? And the whole range of what they're called high-risk technologies, right? from geoengineering, from CRISPR, you name it. There are quite a few, right, out there. And on the other hand, the fact that we as citizens, a member of a democratic community, we don't get it. We don't reach there. We depend on them increasingly, but it's difficult to understand them and then to control them, right? So that's the first paradox. The second one is related more to the question of living in a capitalist society. On the one hand, there is a systematic use of science that underpins capitalist extractivism and capitalist development, right? So, for instance, I don't know, think of a hot issue these days in China, in the European Union, and the United States, rare materials like lithium and so on. There is a global competition for that. Well, in order to find resources, you need science, right? You need science to go around the world, inspect and map the oceans to see where you can find them and how you can actually extract them in order to prevail in the competition for, I don't know, making chips or whatever. Chips, do you say? Chips like in computer chips. Okay. On the other hand, and that's the more subtle and interesting, if you will, contradiction or element of the paradox. There are different strategies of what I call miscognition, strategies of miscognizing science. And again, here I think historians are really important in mapping these strategies. So the general argument is this. We tend to look first on the symptom, which is far right, the symptom of a deep crisis of capitalist democracies and capitalist societies more generally. And we tend to look too much into showy or flashy or in the eyes denialism. But actually, ignoring science presupposes a variety of oblique, complex strategies, right? They need to be mapped, and they have a bigger impact than actually the far right has on practice, right? So these practices can go from marginalization, trivialization, glossing over, behind-the-door negationism, right? Or conspiracy. I use this word, conspiracy. And I refer to a book which is absolutely brilliant book of a historian of science, The Merchant of Doubt. She uses conspiracy, and I think rightly so, to refer to different to groups of scientists and to types of industries. Also, this is related to the tobacco industry, to the climate science, and so on and so forth. Now, we should distinguish. I think we should not be shy. We ought to be prudish in academia about using conspiracy, because that sounds like conspirationism. Conspiracy and conspirationism are two different things. Conspirationism means explaining the world on the basis of the logic of the development of the world, on the basis of what small groups of people decide behind the doors. And the world, I mean, that's paranoia, because obviously the world is too complex to actually be reduced to that. But there is a big difference between conspirationism as a sort of systematic approach to how the world develops, and take into account that conspiracies happen. And I reveal here, I like very much this quote from the founder of capitalism, nonetheless, the god of the Chicago School, Adam Smith, who in The Wealth of Nations, he draws attention to the fact that one of the dangers of the development of the market, or the free development of the market, is actually a conspiracy. That is, economic groups or individuals who, behind the door, make agreements that go against the public good. This is the quote from Adam Smith. So I think that happens, right? And I think you should not be shy of also taking into account such words as conspiracy. But again, the miscognition, I use a Bourdieu word, and I expand it, is méconnaissance in French. The miscognition strategies, I think, They're varied and they're more important in practical terms with respect to the question of science than the flashy denialism that we normally focus on. And here we need history, you know, to do that. Archival work, interviews, to map this practical complexity, right? The second side of the argument, and here I put two quotes from, another two quotes from Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialectic of Enlightenment. This book is not against, let's say, science. It's favorable to science. But what they note is that, first, trivialities. Science is power, and that generates problems, right? And the second thing is that in the capitalist society, scientific endeavor tends to be reduced to what they call instrumental reasons, right? So this is conveyed by the second quote, right? And they say technology is the essence of this knowledge, that is scientific knowledge. It aims to produce neither concepts nor images, nor the joy of understanding, you know? I mean, one image of scientific endeavor is, this is driven by the joy of understanding, by curiosity, which is disinterested. There is that. They don't deny that. But what happens that in practical terms, in capitalist society, capitalist extractivism becomes fundamentally entangled and determines scientific endeavor, tending to reduce it to what they call instrumental reason. That is, to an objectifying relation to nature, but also to the members of the community, right? And that's a big problem. And I think they're right. So we need to look at the question of science and of what is actually extreme in a deeper way. So what I call the logic of the extreme pertains to an analysis of capitalism that you find already in Marx and Engels. And basically their argument is that capitalism tends, and therein lies its extremism, tends to take over with its logic of profit, of take over of other domains of practice and life, tends to colonize them, being sports, science, aesthetics, religion, politics, and so on and so forth. And that's a big problem because it has violent, destructive implications and consequences. So I think here there is something deep going on, and you need to, in order to understand our current condition, you need to go beyond the narrow use of extremism to point to certain parties that are a symptom of a deeper problem and deeper trouble. Now, in order to exemplify this argument of the deep bond between science and capitalism, I put here a piece of news that I found by the TASS, which is the official Russian, is from this year. So it's Putin gave a decree. I mean, these are things that you don't really read about them, So, but you can find on the internet. Gave a decree. So he has a national science policy that is systematic, and it resembles quite a lot the European Union policy in terms of priorities, actually. And here we have a very sweet image of a very likable Putin shaking hands with the robot. So I mean, this entanglement between capitalism and science. I mean, capitalist extractivism is driven by capitalist competition between China, United States. A little bit of European Union is driven by scientific development. Is or should be at the core of a reflection of what is going on in terms of, extreme dynamics in our society, which is actually normalized and embedded in our institutions and common sense. What about Europe? Well, if you look at the literature on what is going on in the case of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence governance, it's really market-driven. It's not citizen-driven. It's market-driven, mainly. It was a struggle to that meant it was a partial win to actually introduce in the European Union AI Act the word the more democracy. But if you look at the mechanisms of the European governance that are developing right now is really market-driven. Just as if you look at the critical literature, what is going on in the green transition, there's a lot of nice talk, but actually, in practice, the green transition, which is, well, a good thing and an absolutely emergent and necessary thing, well, it is so, but if it becomes just a facet of extractivism, it becomes a little bit of a less so, right? So here I put a nice caricature that I found with Elon and his mother to make a reference to the Draghi report that was published, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. Well, I had a look at the Draghi report, and the Draghi report, it says, well, Europe is doomed if you don't implement a sort of a new Marshall Plan. I mean, and it conveys a sort of malaise or sort of a bad dream that he. And the bad dream can be captured by one idea. How come that you don't have Elon Musk in Europe? We need one, right? This is the deep concern of Draghi. Is basically that. I mean, I simplified it. It's a complex report, but he says, well, we don't have a Silicon Valley. I like lagging behind. China and the United States. If you want to survive, we need that. So here, what you have is at the center of the European discourse. You have a sort of a reproduction of the same dynamic with differences, democracy, and a lot of nice words, that involves a deep problematic entanglement between capitalism, science, and problematic, not citizen-oriented, let's say, policies, right? So what do you expect? So what I find here in the case of AI, as far as it is developed, but also in the field of green transition, is a sort of a patchwork, what I call patchwork democratic approach, right? So there are parches in Spanish. How do you say parches? They are just elements of adjustment, but they are really secondary to what is going on. What is going on is precisely this entanglement that I try to unravel. Now, what about the more of a positive spin, if anything? Now, first, the key problem was, I think, precisely identified in the first day by Professor Subirats when he said that the deep problem that we have to face is inequality. I think that's the big problem, in the big malaise, and part of the large part of the explanation of the emergence of these authoritarian forces in the midst of our liberal democracies, whatever that means, is inequality. Is that the democratic promise has not been fulfilled. That's a problem identified by Subirats, but also by Aristotle, actually, some 2,000 years ago in the Politics. He says it very clearly. It is no possibility to build a community of free individuals, of free citizens, in a society in which economic disparities, economic inequalities are abysmal. Inequalities, okay, they are legitimate. He did not, he was not imagining, just like Plato, a sort of communist or proto-communist regime where propriety is put in common, or everybody is equal in economic terms. Nothing like that in Aristotle. However, if these inequalities are abysmal, that undermines freedom, and that's the problem that actually we face nowadays. Aristotle is always good to read, so and Stephen thinks I'm a philosopher, so I felt compelled to mention some philosophers as well who anticipate very well our problems. Now, if you look at my field, this political theory, you see you have a big problem. And that big problem probably derives from the fact that many political philosophers who are still influential build their theories somehow in opposition with what they took as communism or the communist threat, or in the circumstances of the Cold War. So you see transversally from Hannah Arendt, Schklar, Hayek, Berlin, Habermas, Rawls, you see a definition of understanding of democracy that is mainly political, that forgets about society. And I do think that now we need a sort of a new foundational moment in, if we are to overcome this deep problem that it is the root of the far-right movements, inequality. If you are to overcome it, we need a sort of a refoundation of democratic discourse and practices in the European Union, but not only, based on understanding of democracy as a social project, right? If not a way of life, right? So what about the role of science in this enterprise? It's very, very complicated because we are with these paradoxes that I mentioned, right? How do you go about them? Well, we need institutional inventions, right? We are kind of far. People don't speak about that in the public sphere. Theories, they do. What you have, for instance, in order to deal with the first paradox, increasing relevance of science and impact on our daily life at all aspects. On the one hand, the opaqueness of science, the unavailability of the citizens to scientific discourse and technologies, right? So what you have right now systematically implemented, apart from the nice European ideas that we have to comply with when you have European project, is called civic science. We need to reach out to the people. But that's really insufficient, right? You have, in terms of concrete mechanisms, you have parliamentary supervision, but you need really new type of, mini publics. Some people speak, like Zeynep Pamuk, speak about science courts. I don't like the word courts, but what she means is really public debates where citizens with scientists who explain such and such technologies and their impact, what type of CRISPR, for instance. You have different scientists who debate, explain in simple terms beyond the technicalities, the impact and ethical relevance, and you have citizens speak randomly who engage in that and have a say somehow on the policy as well. We are far from that, but I think that if we are to deal with this paradoxes generated by the amazing, accelerated, unprecedentedly accelerated revolution, techno-revolution that we are undergoing. Think of artificial intelligence. We need something substantively more on the democratic side, to actually move towards what I called, putting things in a broader framework, democracy as a social project, if not a way of life. And this type of dynamic should clearly go towards a sort of what I call a new alliance between science, democracy, and a sort of eco-humanistic vision that also moves away from extractivism. Here I make a distinction between extractivism, systematic extractivism, and extraction. I don't think we can go beyond extraction or instrumental reason, right? That is criticized as a sort of reductionist approach to science. Well, that's part of our civilization. The problem becomes when instrumentally reason and the dynamics that are realized on that basis take over, as it were. They're generalized. Okay. Conclusions very fast. Stephen is getting impatient here. So I try to argue that we need to enlarge the focus, right? So we focus on the symptom, and we should look beyond that. And we focus on a part of a symptom. We should first look into the systematic of the center parties. And I focused on the center right, but I think that some center left also have these complex, what I call miscognition strategies, right? Deviance, marginalization, trivialization, minimization, right? Maybe sometimes conspiracy. And the third step was to suggest that actually the type of civilization that we live on, right, the type of society, the capitalist society, have a sort of extreme dynamic at this basis. And I think even from a liberal or Republican perspective, one can accept, in my view at least, the Marx's and Engels' basic insight that what's going on in the capitalist society is that the economic profit-making dynamic tends to take over the other dimensions of our existence, and that's radical. You know, the effects are radical over nature, but also of our lives, and that's extreme, and that's problematic. It's the root. It's the root of our problems. Here, on purpose, I put forward an argument that goes beyond, but something that I have doubts about, namely the neoliberal narrative. You know, which is very limited in terms of explanation. It focuses on a specific period, and I think not only that is very limited, but it also gives too much power to ideas. It is as if some Chicago boys shaped practice in an unmediated way through their ideas. Ideas matter, but I think other factors matter. And third point, the way we reach a situation in which at the global level we are in trouble didn't follow the same path. So my feeling is that, but again, it's my feeling. It's not, I'm not a historian. My feeling is that for left-wingers, too often neoliberalism works like a magic key, the magic explanation. You say neoliberalism, and then you have fusion between spontaneous fusion between scholars. We know what you talk about. It's, the great cause, the great evil, right? I'm sure neoliberalism is evil, but I think that we need maybe a little bit more complex explanation. So what is extremism? So yesterday, I decided to actually venture a definition. I mean, I didn't intend to, but in the end, pressed by Stephen's questions, yesterday, I thought, well, maybe I should approximate the difference. So I thought of defining what I call societal extremism. So not only political, it can be economic, it can be social, right? So that's why I use the word societal. So you have a constellation of different sets of discourses and or institutional practices, so it can be institutionalized or not, that are systematically cruel, and I referred to debate yesterday, the cruelty of Rajoy's law, right? We spoke about that. Violent, then it's not exactly the same, or destructive, and that can take authoritarian forms, authoritarian parties, movements, political regimes, or eco-social or economic dynamics, right? So I refer obviously to extremism in a specific context, which is our discussion. I don't refer to, I don't know, psychology of such and such person, for instance, psychotic. And the second, and with this I finish, I mean, I do think that we are sort of a crossroads. Things are getting worse. We discussed that in the first day. We commented on the chilling new surveys concerning what young people, the youngest people, think about democracy and authoritarianism. I mean, when 60% of those who are between 19 and 25 years old, when they are asked whether they will sacrifice some liberties in order to preserve their way of life, well-being or something like that, and I remember the formulation. This is really worrying, because democracy is not associated to the way of life, to a vision, to well-being, and so on and so forth, right? So things are, I think, dramatic. When so many people go for that, right? So I think we are sort of a crossroads, and the crisis is deepening, and I'm worried when I listen to, for instance, Kamala Harris. I just worry that she has just this patchwork democratic approach to deep structural problems, and I'm worried also when I listen to van Leiden for the same or similar reason. And I wanted to finish with 2 quotes. One is from a philosopher, cultural theorist, Benjamin, right, who in Thesis on the Philosophy of History, he says there is a document of civilizations is not at the same time a document of barbarism. And I do think that this applies to our civilizations. There is a deep logic of the extreme that is at the core of, well, common institution and common practices, right? And as a bow to our organizers, I moved to Italy. I liked very much this quote. We are at the crossroad. We don't know exactly yet. I mean, as I was in my question yesterday, I was trying to suggest, well, Vox or Aur in Romania, Vox in Spain or Aur in Romania are not exactly iron guard. So, I mean, they're not physically, systematically violent, right? But we don't know how you're going to interpret them, these phenomena, in 2 years. We don't know their significance, right? Because we are inside of a process, right? And this can get worse, right? And this quote from this great historian who is in a fight with legal fight with Meloni is that fascism actually did not emerge immediately as a dictatorship. It became gradually a dictatorship, and I thought that I would finish here with the reference to a historian. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you really very much, Camil. A lot of idea or well, things to think about, really. So I think we have like around 15 minutes, more or less, to question, debate, some consideration from the public. We have one person here. Yeah. Sorry for the micro.
Hi. You mentioned that the root of the extremism is inequality in the societies, and I tend to agree. But then I think about the countries that are more equal, according to many statistics, which are the Nordic countries, and they have really worrying extreme far-right parties that are everything that Vox is and more. How could you explain that?
Maybe we take a couple of questions. Yeah, there's another there.
Thank you very much for this very interesting speech. And I have one question. You were speaking in the beginning about the shift from denialism and rejection of certain scientific consensus towards what you called méconnaissance strategies. Miscognition strategies, right? Yeah. How do you explain that shift? Why? What drove that shift? In the sense that, was it simply greater awareness of the public which made rational political actors adapt for electoral purposes, or not? Are there other drivers?
The shift from miscognition to?
I meant from denialism. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I think there's a question here.
Yes, thank you very much. A lot of ideas. I'm happy that you quote German philosophers too. No,
always.
Maybe I could react to the first question, because maybe it can help you. I would think, inequality, maybe in terms of perception of inequality, and the idea that these inequalities can be overcome or not. And I think it's a really good perspective, because I mean, when I think about Germany in the 50s, there were inequalities, but the people had the feeling that this personal situation would be improving, and that was a topic in the first day.
Yeah,
that's
point.
The perspective.
Lack of perspective.
And there are also very interesting studies about AfD voters in Germany, and things there is a difference between how they perceive the personal situation and how they perceive the general situation. And sometimes I say, yes, there are more and more inequalities and social problems, but when they are asked about a personal situation, they don't answer the same. So it's, I think, a lot of had to do with perceptions and the media and social media play a role. And my what you say about yes, that the extremism comes from the center. I think it depends on the situation, because when I think of German case today, I wouldn't say that. But when I think about 19th century, I would say that, because the idea, for example, what I said yesterday about Überfremdung of a foreignization, that came way from the middle of the society, from the center. It was liberal politicians or intellectuals, historians, that spread this narrative. So I would say it's not something that just happened now, but yeah, it's really something, and maybe some kind of circulation, and I wouldn't say, but of really interesting thoughts.
Maybe we take a fourth question here, no? It's okay for you? Or you want to answer? Yeah,
no, it's okay. I'm forgetting
no, so maybe, okay.
No,
so
I'm forgetting the questions I don't know what to answer for, so it's perfect for me. More questions. More questions.
Okay, so Nayara?
Okay. Thank you so much. It will bring to many discussions. It's super interesting and very related to what we do in Arenas. And I wanted to go to the definition of extremism. And according to that, I have a question. Can we defend democracy or the democratic system, democratic society in an extreme way? Should we? Is that possible? And if yes, that brings us to the paradox of how tolerant we can be with intolerance, and how tolerant can we be with extreme, and does extreme need to be negative, cruel, violent, or is it sometimes justified?
And there's a question there at the end, Neil, and then to connect this is interesting, because in political terms is the debate that there is now in Poland about what can the Donald Tusk government do if they follow all the rules to try to change the urbanization of the system of the peace government. They cannot do it because they create new institutions. And there's a debate where, for example, I think was the Financial Times or the Economist say, no, they could break the rule to recover democracy. But other institutions say no, because if you use the same tools of the others, you are well. So it's I think it's a good point, more theoretically and also practically in some way. Okay, there's a question there.
Just very quickly, and somehow in line with what with the last, at least the last provocation, how can we defend on the side of the democracy, let's say, a position against what you call social extremism, when we have somehow forsaken important concepts like free speech that has been stolen on the side. So this is our position now defended by Trump, by his allies like Elon Musk. Wouldn't it be, so how do you navigate these contradictions both in practice and in theory? Shouldn't it be smart, let's say, to steal some of these concepts back when we at least say we are on the side of democracy, which has to go also with freedom?
Can I? Okay. Yeah, it's just, I really forgot some of the questions. They're really important. So the answer is yes. You need to steal them back, right? So, for instance, I think it's wrong if the democratic forces don't deal systematically with the question of family or nation, right? I like very much what Alejandro answered to actually a similar question. We are not here. Yesterday morning, Alejandro said, when I raised this question about the nation, right? Because his constructive discourse all about, he seemed very cosmopolitan, but he answered something really nice, I thought. We do need, not maybe the question of to co-opt nationalism, but patriotism, right? He spoke about social patriotism, right? Understood in terms of solidarity, equality among citizens. I find that really nice. It's a nice example of counter co-opting that I think is is urgent. But I do think a discourse on the family is really important, there's a culture war going on. So you'd better co-opt, and not only co-opt, which are the media on which you co-opt, right? So in the first debate, there's raised the question of the fragmentation of the public sphere, the fact that you have influencers that are far right. So you have 20 influencers with 200,000 followers. That's a lot, and you don't have. You need influences as well on the other side. So both the medium is important, and the counter narrative. Concerning democratic extremism. Thanks for this complicated question, as if my definition were not complicated enough. I would say yes. I would say you can conceive of good forms of extremism or democratic extremism. Let me give you an example. So in Australia, those who are in civic disobedience, actually they were violent at one point in the 80s, were still doing cruel experiments on chimps, right? Now they're prohibited by law, right? In the 70s, I think. So a group of animal rights defender destroyed the lab, right? So from a normative perspective, you can call that extreme, and it was also violent, right? So from the perspective of what is called in political theory civil disobedience, I think that's justifiable. And actually, Peter Singer, one of the great defenders of animal rights, defends that type of secret, uncivil, violent type of defense. You can call that extreme, right? So, yes, for the complication of the discourse. Was, for instance, Gandhi extreme? Radically extreme. Yeah, in some ways, or some of the practices of the Fridays for how is it called? Fridays for the future, right? Some of the practices, So I think you can go in that to complexify what is extremism. So I agree with you. There is room for debate there, but in principle, I think you can conceive that. Concerning 29th, or for instance, what these young do with the paintings, is that extreme? Maybe yes. I mean, the punishing the youth for blocking, I don't know, something, or in Germany is going on. I mean, it's a nightmare. Also UK, I mean, this is a nightmare, right? So. Are they this extreme? I mean, they're also turned into extremists by the mass media, the ecological terrorists and so on. So you need to be careful there in the use of the words. Okay, so in the 19th century history, I fully agree with you. I have no idea, but I fully agree with you. Concerning what is going on, the center, you're saying, well, in Germany is not. You don't have this pattern right now. Well, I agree with you. So my argument was not about all the contexts saying the same. Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in some cases you don't need to broaden the scope, right? It's just that in quite a few cases, I think you need to broaden the scope, right? So I didn't want to cover all the context. There is diversity there, but you definitely need to broaden the scope. Concerning the question of inequality, it's an extremely complex question. Here, inequality is not something set in stone. Inequality in a village in Ethiopia and equality in a village in Finland or in Helsinki mean completely different things. And it has perception dimensions, a variety of dimensions. Equality is relative. There is this passage in Marx that I really love, and he captures that. I go back to Marx. I'm sorry. It's exasperation from a fellow Hungarian. So Marx can be awful. Okay, so I agree with that. So, so he says, well, a person who has a house a tiny house on a hill, nothing is around, doesn't have a problem. He's happy or she's happy, right? But imagine the following situation: when on the other hill, a double-sized house is built. Well, suddenly the person becomes becomes unhappy, says Marx. This is to convey the fact that inequality here and the malaise related to the temporal dimension, lack of perspectives, and so on and so forth, there are different dimensions here, is relative, and we need contextual analysis. I know that this is not a full-fledged answer to your question, but I cannot go into all context. Actually, what happens in a village in Denmark and what happens in Copenhagen is not exactly the same. So, but we need complexity in order to articulate what are the inequality mechanisms, the temporal perspective to overcome them. So you need concrete analysis to put flesh on the argument.
More questions?
Were those all questions?
Second round. We can finish. Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
You are the moderator. You decide.
Yeah. One more question, please.
Yeah.
A wonderful concept. Now, if we cross-examine camera obscura with science denialism, now is it a possibility that it is not about science denialism, but our concept of science denialism regarding camera obscura, the black and white, using the other kind of concepts in order to challenge them? See?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I understand. Maybe I'm just at the end of my point.
You said that there is...
Yeah, I was making an analogy, a loose analogy.
This is a kind of liberal paradox, because we stick to our world, stick to our understanding of the world, and there is nothing that can be otherwise. So what I would argue or question that perhaps it is not about denialism, it is about a different conception of science.
Yeah, I mean, look, the far right is parasiting on deep malaise, and I mean, and this is not reducible to inequality, right? To go back to your question, I think there is a deep as well spiritual malaise, right? There's a lack of meaning, right? So the far right in different places, what they do is to recover that meaning or to gesture in that direction, you know, to appeal to spiritual traditions, you know. And I suggested that actually, when it comes to science, this idea of a holistic science, whatever that means, which is not simply denialist, is a sort of a package which is toxic, but it conveys something deep, I think, that is captured by reactionary writers like Welbeck in France, for instance. I mean, he's spot on to refer to this to this lack of meaning. So the appeal to tradition, not merely offering certitudes, that as well, you know. The lack of certitudes, the need for certitudes, that as well. But there is the deep spiritual need. So the other understanding of science that some of them propose goes in that direction. And there is truth to that. But the articulation, there is truth when it comes to the causes and to the problems. But the articulation is awful. You need the other types of articulations in order to that are not limited to, let's say, science turned dogmatic. What I call scientist managerialism on scientism, right? And there is that temptation, right? You have, for instance, some of the Silicon Valley fellows say, well, with science and technology, you can solve all humanity's problems, including the meaning problem. You do not. You do not. And I think that in this sense, this Draghi's report, which basically says, why don't you, which basically craves for Elon Musk in Europe, says, look, we need the Silicon Valley in Europe. I think Silicon Valley and characters like Elon Musk in particular, he synthesizes our deep and ever deeper problems. I mean, he's a techno-science engineer maverick who denies, is the first, in the first slide I put a tweet of his from 2-3 days ago, sent by a friend. I don't really follow him, but probably I should, because he's interesting. And he basically denies the legitimacy of the university system in the United States. In other words, he denies those who produce, well, reliable scientific knowledge. Of course, yes, plural can be contested or whatever, but I mean, these are the people who produce science. So somebody who takes advantage, produces technoscience, right, undermines scientific, in a systematic way, scientific expertise. This combination between capitalism, his authoritarian deriva, and scientific discourse, this type of bond, takes different forms in the world. He's just one important facet, right, of this deeper phenomenon that is growing and is deeply troubling. And as Adorno and Horkheimer argue, is linked to a production of a new imagination and new myths. Harari, and with this I finish my very short answer, has a nice paragraph. I mean, Harari is controversial, but he has a nice paragraph in one of his books, and he says, if the Arabian desert was the berceau, how do you say, the cradle of monotheisms, right? In reality, it's also the Near East, whatever. It's not only now the cradle of the future religions is the Silicon Valley. That's interesting, and that's a thought to keep in mind when it comes to thinking of the question of science and the complex entanglements also with mythology, meaning production, and religion.
Okay, thank you. We finish here. We
Thank
have
you.
to follow the time. So thank you very much, Camil, for your excellent lecture. Thank you to the audience for the excellent questions, and thank you for the excellent answers. So we finish here. We have a coffee break, and we came back with a roundtable about extremism, narratives, and science at 11:45. Thank you.